As somebody who was run out of New Jersey because of gun control, I think I have a sort of particular prickliness to New Jersey politicians coming for my guns. I had to move several states away to feel a little bit safe for not only having the right to keep and bear arms, but to live under a government that wants me to have that right, that is okay with that right, where neighbors say we're better off with our neighbors armed rather than disarmed and only agents of the state having guns. And it's always important to remember when we consider these things that the state is force. It is about do this or else. Welcome back to another edition of The Uprising, a podcast of LibertyNation.com, and this is your host, Scott D. Cosenza. When Cory Booker looks around, what does he see? He sees that the problems in society are caused chiefly by guns, and only by taking them away from his fellow Americans can we really start on the pathway along the road to peace and prosperity. Never mind, of course, that the liberty that Americans have was first gained by its own citizens owning guns. When the Patriots took to the green at Lexington and Concord, they did so with their own arms, or ones they had stolen from the British. It wasn't government-supplied police arms that created this republic, this country born in liberty. And we will lose it, for sure, if government agents are the only ones that are allowed to keep and bear arms. It would seem like the most progressive anti-establishment or anti-Trump person in the country would be equally on the page of don't take our guns away. If you believe Donald Trump is the worst of the sort of hysterics about him, right, that he's some kind of white supremacist, half a Klansman or worse even, right, there's that lie that he said there were good people on both sides of white supremacists in Charlotte that I always have to debunk. Well, if you believe that to be true, as so many of our fellow Americans seem to, the never Trumpers or anyone but Trumpers, why would you be okay with the government agents being the only ones who have guns? Don't you see that you benefit as a citizen from having a gun? And Cory Booker's assault on gun control is sort of particularly ironic, given the fact that gun control started in this country as a way to keep newly freed slaves from attaining the full measure of rights in this country. You know, how do you keep blacks on a virtual plantation with Jim Crow and everything else, and lynchings, to say the worst of it? Well, keeping them disarmed for sure is a great way to. Because I'll tell you what, you go to somebody's house to lynch them and they have a gun in there. That's a whole different equation. And those of us who advocate for freedom and not this rule by one group over another, we're okay with everybody having guns. One of the lead plaintiffs in what eventually became the Heller case, the famous case that established once and for all that the Supreme Court said the Second Amendment protects an individual rights, was a man called Tom Palmer, who is a gay guy subjected to violence because of his sexuality, and says, the police aren't protecting me. I have to be able to protect myself. And the only practical means to do so is with a gun. Well, to Cory Booker, we'll find out just what kind of person he is. Senator Spartacus released his 47-point plan for taking guns away from his fellow Americans this week. And make no mistake, this is not some third-tier part of his platform to gain power over the rest of us and be president of the United States. It is seemingly the number one thing in his campaign.
Why do you think you're going to be able to change that?
Because to me, and it's not just me, it's us.
This is very much like the civil rights movement to me, where people said, oh, civil rights legislation kept dying in the Senate. The longest filibuster ever, Strom Thurmond's racist rant against civil rights legislation in the face of Birmingham bombings, in the face of Goodman, Cheney, and Schwerner dying in Mississippi for voting rights. People did not give up. They doubled down. They expanded the moral imagination of this country. We have to understand that this is to the core of who we say we are, a nation that believes in life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This is being devastated. Life, the freedom from fear, the pursuit of happiness when your family members are dying or your community is seeing these kind of losses. This is fundamental to who we are. I will not surrender the basic idea of what it means to be American to fear and carnage. We are going to win this fight in the same way we won the civil rights fight, not by resigning ourselves, by saying we cannot wait and coming at it with a moral emergency and getting more people off the sidelines and into the fight to win. As President of the United States, we will win this fight because we will bring a fight like they have never seen before.
So it's now a moral emergency to take guns away from our fellow Americans, law-abiding Americans. And it's a battle akin to the civil rights movement. And that's how hard he's going to go at it. This effort to strip the civil rights of Americans is akin to the civil rights movement. Well, there's all sorts of odious measures in his 42-point plan. Let's go ahead and take a gander at some of them here.
You propose a mandatory interview for every person who would like to purchase a gun. Tell us a little bit more about that. Who would be doing the interview? Would that person be the ultimate decider on if an American can buy a gun? And what would they be looking for? And on top of that, would they get a second shot at an interview ever? Or is this person decide yes or no for the person's lifetime?
Well, let's not exaggerate what this is. It's actually really simple. We do it for passports. We do it for TSA pre-check. We make sure that the documentation people are putting before aligns with the truth. And so this is just basically licensing. We do this for people who are driving cars.
But so I understand the interview would be a more factual interview. You know, are they who they are, not an interview about their mental health or assessing their ability to have a gun and use it judiciously.
This is not something new. We do it in many states. Connecticut did this, and they dropped the gun violence in their state by over 40%.
We'll get to that claim about the Connecticut gun violence in just a second. But before we do, there's actually a sort of a buried lead here. In addition to the overall just gun licensing that's going to be required. So every American who wishes to own a gun is going to have a federal gun license that allows them to permit a firearm. If you happen to live in one of the free states, you don't know what this is. It's a common way that states that don't wish to have people have guns restrict them and frustrate their attempts to do so. New Jersey, Senator Booker's home state, is known to do that, as is Connecticut. You have to have a license to even go buy the gun, sort of like a pre-approval to exercise your right to keep and bear arms. So this would be at the federal level. He says that in the plan, they could seek the gun license at a designated local office widely available in urban and rural areas. Well, yeah, we promise, right? And if one is not widely available, where's your recourse? Well, I don't know where it is. But what's interesting is that he says that you can go there to present your credentials that you're eligible to own a gun. And those include passage of a certified gun safety course. Now, as a NRA certified firearms instructor, this would be welcome to my wallet, to be sure. If every American has to be certified by a trainer to get one of these new federal permission slips to get a gun, well, don't we just cash right in on that? But it's a completely new. There is no right yet discovered in the Constitution that requires this sort of training or permission slip. So how it's going to be overturned, how he's going to overturn the Heller decision is not mentioned in this. Senator Booker says that after Connecticut passed a suite of gun control laws, that their gun crime rate was reduced massively. Well, some of those laws that he's talking about, they do have a gun licensing provision, like a gun owner licensing provision. If you want to buy any gun in Connecticut, you have to apply for just a license to purchase a gun. As a matter of fact, you have to get that license or one form of it simply to purchase any ammunition in Connecticut. It's a staggering requirement. Don't go to Connecticut on a weekend and expect to be able to go to the local sporting goods store and buy a box of shells, because it ain't going to happen. You have to present yourself at one of 3 government offices around the state and ask them for permission slip to then go buy ammo. Well, gun crime and all sorts of crimes can sort of have political massaging of the numbers. It's one of the features of one of the greatest television series ever made is The Wire, and one of the sort of refrains that we learn from that is you can always trust the homicide statistics as a bellwether for a crime rather than the other ones, because it's one of the very few that they cannot massage or fake. Okay, so back to Connecticut and Senator Booker. Well, if we look at the murder rate per 100,000 people, sort of how it's commonly expressed in these statistics, in 2017, last year, for which looks like the completed numbers are in, Connecticut had 2.8 murders per every 100,000 people. And that has fluctuated somewhere in the 2s or even in the 3s since the year 2010. I'll run 2010 to 2017. 3.7, 3.6, 3.3, 2.5, 2.5, 3.2, 2.2, 2.8. Okay. Those are all the number of people per 100,000 that were murdered in that state. Well, let's take a little time machine back to the prehistoric era when there were almost 0 gun control laws. Before the Gun Control Act of 1964, before the Assault Weapons Ban in 1994, before the Gun Control Act of, 80? Doesn't matter. Here's the numbers from 1960 starting to 1969. 1.61, 1.3, 1.8, 1.8, 1.62, 2.4, 2.5, 2.9. So in 1960, when a 12-year-old with a pretty profitable paper route could have bought an assault rifle or a firearm that Senator Booker would call an assault rifle, mail order with cash, the murder rate was 1.6 per 100,000. But today, where there's all this licensing, gun controls, import controls, can't buy mail order, can't buy sight unseen, got to buy in your local state, age of majority, all that business, it's 3 times as high as the murder rate. Why is that? If more guns and access to guns, legal access to guns, which is what this legislation is designed to do, to throw up loopholes to legal access to guns, if it's going to make us safer, why don't the numbers show that it was much less safe when there were almost no gun controls? If he's going to strip Americans of a right so precious that it was the second one listed when the founders listed the rights most dear to them and most important that the government not trample on, it's the Second Amendment to our Constitution. Don't we deserve some better explanation other than his promise? What the hell happens when we're left with no guns and a more violent society and nothing to protect us from it? Or a person who really is a white supremacist who wins the presidency of the United States, or really uses violence against people in a way that patriots would stand up to meet with violence themselves? Well, I'm sure that in that case, Senator Booker will issue a very heartfelt apology. Here he is with sort of a famous lie about gun regulation in the United States and what he's going to do to change it for the actual, so the manufacturing regulations with the Consumer Products Safety Commission.
You've promised also to close some loopholes on gun sales. Why do it that way as opposed to working on a bipartisan solution?
You know, the way the NRA and gun manufacturers have done this is in an insidious way. They've actually literally made us change the lens of what is reasonable. as they've eroded just the common sense we have. Think about the Consumer Product Safety Commission that has exempted guns. There's more regulation now on toy guns than there are on actual guns. We've been letting them dictate the debate for too long. It's time that we dictate what is common sense in our country.
Yeah, letting them dictate the debate, he says, is the gun lobby. But the truth is that Americans came together and said, we won't let them dictate what we can buy. And the them is the Consumer Products Safety Commission. When it was formed, guns were exempted from it so that they couldn't use political mischief to ban guns. The Consumer Product Safety Commission was established to help protect Americans from products introduced in the stream of commerce that are defective for use. So water heaters that have valve placement that makes them likely to blow up, baby cribs or car seats that may kill your baby. That sort of thing is what the Consumer Product Safety Commission was designed to protect against and to help us warn against. And the fear is that the people who hate guns but can't get them banned because of the Second Amendment or because their fellow Americans don't want them banned will come at it from a side door and sort of an oblique attack against these rights. And in fact, the Consumer Product Safety Commission prohibition against regulating firearms is not some sort of backroom deal slipped onto page whatever of a bill. It was openly fought about in the 1970s when the commission was created. With the CPSC and guns, it has been political since the outset. In 1974, the Committee for Handgun Control Incorporated filed a petition before the commission to have all handgun ammunition banned in homes as a hazardous substance. This is the kind of thing that we're defending against, not some rifle or a firearm that misfires or fires when you look at it and is a danger to the public. No, they are trying to get a backdoor ban in, and it's just disingenuous to say otherwise. You know, Booker himself rails against the National Rifle Association, and we're going to get to his points on that in a minute here. But according to the NRA's own self-history, it's this Consumer Product Safety Commission ban that gave birth to the NRA-ILA, or the NRA Institute for Legislative Action, which is one of the groups that they hate the most, because that sort of brings the political power to bear against the opponents of the NRA. But it was a defensive measure. Gun grabbers, Ted Kennedy amongst their chiefs, were trying to use the mechanisms and levers of the government in a way that was unforeseen by the people who passed the legislation to begin with. It's a products safety group, not a we're going to take your rights away. It would be like if a bunch of crazy Republicans got in there and said, oh, we're going to ban all the machines necessary to perform an abortion. That's the kind of level of thing that we're talking about here. It would be ridiculous for them to do so, to try to ban abortions through a CPSC action, as it is for Ted Kennedy and and now his legacy, Cory Booker, to do the same. Well, his plan, Mr. Booker's plan, Senator Booker's plan is even worse than Mr. Swalwell's plan. Now, Mr. Swalwell says there's a buyback. And I have to actually compliment, I think it's Poppy Harlow from CNN, who is actually holding Booker's feet to the fire a little bit and demanding some answers about some of these plan details, which we're pretty light on. And she goes on to talk about to Mr. Booker that Swalwell says we're going to offer a buyback so that you can sell your gun to the federal government, which at least mitigates the taking aspect of this law. These guns are not inexpensive. Many of them are quite valuable. And to say that we're going to ban, and just so you're clear on the numbers here, there are estimated, I think the last number I saw was 5 million AR-15s in the United States of America. And that's just that particular brand, that particular model of this type of firearm. This is something that's going to be, what could it be, 15 million items that are going to have to be taken, all of which are worth hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of dollars, well, that's a pretty big loss to the people of America in terms of their assets. At least with Swalwell's plan, you get the money for your gun. What does Booker say about that?
Eric Swalwell has also, like you, proposed an assault weapons ban, but he's proposing a buyback program where Americans who currently have those guns could sell them, essentially, to the government. But if they don't, within a certain period of time, they would be prosecuted, so subject to be thrown in jail, perhaps. Are you supportive of the same measure?
Well, first of all, when I was mayor of the city of Newark, again, I have a record on dealing with gun violence. We did a lot of gun buybacks and even other creative ideas that I think we should have when I'm president of the United States. The critical thing is, I think most Americans agree that these weapons of war should not be on our streets.
But would you prosecute people? Do you support the government buying them back? And if not, potentially people could go to jail if they don't want to sell them back. Yes or no?
Again, we should have a law that bans these weapons, and we should have a reasonable period in which people can turn in these weapons.
So he's unclear in his response whether he's willing to go for the buyback. And I recognize that there's no buying back, meaning these guns were never owned by the federal government in the first place, nor any government to be bought back. They're simply being seized. But we can say that seizure with compensation is certainly better than seizure without it. And Booker seems kind of vague when he first says it. And so she gives him a second chance. And she says, will you buy them from the people? And he says, essentially, no. He says, what we need is a law that bans them and a reasonable amount of time to turn it in, not a reasonable amount of time to turn it in with compensation. So that seems like a clear enough answer for me to say that he just thinks we should forfeit. Gun owners should just forfeit their property for the imagined safety benefit he touts. He also says most Americans agree that these weapons of war should not be on our city streets. Well, did you first lie to them and say that these were weapons of war? Because all the weapons that we're talking about here, these quote-unquote assault weapons, are not used by the American military in their wars because they're less effective for combat purposes. The AR-15 assault rifle you hear about all the time, not used by the U.S. military. That's it. It's not a weapon of war. Does the average American know that when they're polled about whether or not they should be banned or not? I'm guessing the ignorance level among the non-gun enthusiast public is pretty high on this point, used to Senator Booker's advantage. So it's a civil rights type question. It's supported by most Americans, and it features common sense proposals.
And so I'm coming at this full bore, enough of this seeming to resign ourselves to this level of carnage in America. This is a common sense plan that the only people that should be worried are those people who seek to do wrong by Americans.
The only people who should be worried are people who seek to do wrong by other Americans. How nice that you have pre-qualified opposition to your proposed legislation fundamentally altering the Second Amendment rights of Americans and their physical property, billions, probably it could be trillions, I don't know, of dollars of physical property. And it's just the evil people that are opposing it. You can't be well-intentioned or misinformed or simply mistaken. God forbid. No, you must be evil if you oppose this. That's to say nothing of his unironic use of full-bore support for this common sense plan to strip all Americans of their most practical means of self-defense and the rights to enjoy same. We'll all get to live in New Jersey, even if we live somewhere else. Reluctantly, this humble servant of the people let us know the type of hero that he is.
My whole career has been about running towards problems people said were impossible to solve, but being very pragmatic and bringing together uncommon coalitions to produce uncommon results. And the best evidence of that as a United States Senator is people told me we couldn't pass comprehensive criminal justice reform with a Republican president. Well, I led that on the Democratic Senate side with Dick Durbin, and it was accomplished by being pragmatic and working across the aisle to find common ground.
So what Cory Booker just did there was he said, they told me we couldn't pass comprehensive criminal justice reform, but we got that done. Him and Durbin did it. In spite of the Republican president, they said it couldn't be done. Well, it couldn't be done with a Republican president who opposed that package of legislation. We didn't have one of those. In fact, we had a Republican president who was an a-Republican. He's not a typical Republican. He's Donald Trump, and that's how that legislation got passed. This is the criminal justice reform that Kim Kardashian lobbied for, that Donald Trump approved, that what was key to getting its passage was not getting a single Democrat to vote for it as a Republican majority in the House and the Senate when it passed, but was to get some Republicans on board who were blocking the legislation. That's what was needed. So I just present this, in his big moment to talk about this new legislation. What does he do? He introduces a lie, this fraud, that somehow Cory Booker was instrumental in getting this legislation passed. He was a yes vote. That's all. He didn't make any moves, broker any deals to advance that legislation forward, to do some legislative compromise or anything like that. It's absolutely ridiculous. And to suggest it adds to his bona fides as some sort of grand legislator, well, it's I'm sure another part of the fiction that he will use to try to build himself up as he attempts to become the Democrat nominee for president.